make sure your heart's in it, right? If your heart isn't in 110%, don't go for it. And that's pretty obvious, but also your team has to have that. I'd say that's the other key piece of advice that I would give is don't expect to just hire people and have them do the type of job that you want them to do just because you're giving them a paycheck. Doesn't matter how big the paycheck is, you're going to get people, if you pay a ton of money, you'll get people who care about making a ton of money. You have to get people whose heart is in it as well. And I think that's the only thing that can truly make a difference in the long run.
This is Pittsburgh, a place where a rich heritage of making things and a fierce independent nature come together to create a thriving entrepreneurial community. Whether you're a small business owner looking for ideas or inspiration, or you're an enthusiastic supporter of local businesses, you'll find it here. I'm your host, Darin Vilano, and this is the Proprietors of Pittsburgh podcast. Today, my guest is Matt Marietti, who is the owner of Atelier de Fer, coffee and tea. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for including me. It's exciting.
Yeah. So I wanted to know, what was the inspiration for your business? Where did the theme come from? Where did the idea come from? You're probably thinking about it for a while before you launched, obviously. I'm curious, where does it all come from, and what was it inspired by?
Yeah, sure. Good question. And you're right, thought about it for a long time before we actually got it going. My wife and I, it comes down to kind of our shared passion, which has always been food and kind of public meeting spaces where you can be out of the house and be meeting friends and spending time. So we always knew we wanted to open some kind of concept around food and community and that kind of thing, but we weren't sure exactly what that would look like. We love coffee, but we also love wine, and we love cooking and baking and all those kind of things. So we wanted to create something that kind of tied all that together. Mm-hmm. And then before we opened this business, my last corporate role I was with Kraft Heinz. Mm-hmm. My last corporate role with them was director for food service business in the UK and Ireland. Okay. So I got to live in London, and we spent a lot of time traveling in Europe and living in Europe, I think, really helped crystallize the idea of what a cafe could be. Mm-hmm. And we've been to Europe before and had the chance to travel a good bit. So we knew that they're really onto something with their cafe model. And it's an old business model. It's probably one of the oldest, but right. Somewhere where people can come together any time of day, any type of group of people, from people on a date to families, after church, it doesn't matter. A place where people could come together and get some high quality drinks, regardless of what that is. That could mean caffeine for some people, could mean wine for some people, could be herbal tea, doesn't matter. So the drinks and the menu were kind of had to fit themselves into the model, really, which started as just a good place to meet and get kind of high quality food and drink made from scratch. So that was the inspiration. Living over there really helped us fine tune it. The French and where the inspiration for the name comes from, right? Really, I think took cafe and cafe culture to.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because obviously it has the French name, the French theme. For anybody that's been to Europe, the way you lay out your food, the way you display it in the case, the kinds of offerings you have, you could definitely tell it's got that European that feel and flavor, and also the name, which we should say what it means for anybody that doesn't know. What does Atelier de Fer mean?
Sure, it means loosely iron workshop. Mm-hmm. Right, so it's a place where we work. Obviously, this is our production space too. We do all of our roasting out of here. So it is our workshop, but also it's a nod to Pittsburgh's long storied past of manufacturing top quality goods in the city of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. So we're proud to be a part of that, going forward. But so yeah, nod to the two things that kind of inspired us, which was Pittsburgh's long history of manufacturing and of course the French cafe culture.
Cool. So you mentioned coffee. You and your wife love a lot of things with the food culture, the baking, the cooking, but the coffee, you roast your own coffee, and I'm curious, was that a central, in the concept from the very beginning, was that a central theme that you wanted to roast your own coffee, and did you build out your menu and your concept from that point, or was that something that you added later and it wasn't central? I'm just curious what role the coffee roasting itself had played for your business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was central because you said it. We love coffee, right? First and foremost, we wanted to be doing something that we love and care deeply about. But the bigger piece of it too was we want to know that all the effort that we're putting in at the end of the day is going to leave a positive impact beyond just the people that we're affecting directly here in Pittsburgh, ourselves, our employees, our families, our customers. So the more that we buy quality coffee based on quality as opposed to quantity, the better for the regions that grow it, the better for the farmers, the importers, the people who produce the coffee.
So that was kind of what I was thinking about, because plenty of cafe owners could sell somebody else's product, and I was wondering what was so important about you doing it yourself. And it sounds like part of that answer is, I mean, of course, your love for it, and you probably want to craft your own flavors, but it sounds like also the ecology, the environment, the support of the right kinds of farmers, buying the right kinds of beans also played into it, so that you knew what you were doing here was supporting more beyond just, okay, let me just sell anybody's coffee. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Shortening the supply chain, getting as close to the farmers as we can. And we work with importers now, and we work directly with some farms too. But they're importers that we vetted, and then we believe that we work with people who really care as much as we do about getting the money to the right place, paying a fair price for quality coffee, and making sure that the impact that we're leaving is a positive one in economic terms for the regions that grow the coffee, because most coffee is still commodity coffee. I think it's still about 90% of the world's coffee is traded based on volume and weight, and quality is an afterthought, right? And also we know that Pittsburgh's ready for good coffee, right? There have been great coffee here for quite a while, but it's not as pervasive as it is in other cities, right? So we want to just help open people's eyes to the fact that coffee can be so much more than what people grew up possibly believing that it could be. So we knew the market was ready for it, and yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, 20 years ago, I lived here and I went to Pitt, and I could tell you that coffee culture was very different in the 90s than it is today. It's come a long way. Speaking of coffee and roasting, where did you learn to roast? And because, as you mentioned, you had a corporate career, et cetera, you weren't always doing this. Where did you learn to roast, and how would you describe your roasting style? And how and you talked a little bit about it, but how you're selecting the farms and the beans, sort of a little bit more of what goes into that.
Sure. Well, the first part of the question, how to learn to roast. Done all the things that you can do these days, right? I've read all the books, watched all the videos. I trained with the company San Franciscan in Carson City, Nevada, who built our roaster. I trained on that machine as they were finishing building it. I did some formal certifications. I did one in Boulder, Colorado with Ozo Roasters, a really great roaster out there. I've done some training since then with Rob Hoos, if you've ever heard of him, out in Portland, Oregon. He's a head roaster and educator for Nasa Family Coffee, and he's written books and stuff. He's a really cool educator, and he has a really nice attitude, and training with him was probably the coolest thing I've done so far. But the big thing is just repetition, right? We just went over 5,000 roasts on that machine, so roast and taste and roast and taste and roast and taste, and
keep dialing in, fine-tuning it.
Closer.
And then how would you, do you have, I mean, is there a such thing as a roasting style, or is there, is it, I mean, how do you, I'm not as familiar with it, is this something that you just, does every person have their own sort of style? Is it very individualistic, basically?
Absolutely. There's definitely individual styles. There are definitely regional styles. I think me coming into this industry from outside actually was kind of a positive to me, because I had no preconceived notions of how coffee should be roasted or what was a West Coast style versus a Nordic style. And my approach has always been to just get the best possible balance out of the coffee, right? The best balance of body versus acidity versus flavor. So that's my style, and I'm sure a lot of roasters would say the same thing. But so not being committed to any one style or developing a certain type of style, I think has left my mind very open, and we're just trying to get the coffee to taste as best as it can inherently with what's in the bean.
And you've been doing it for a few years now? You've been open for a few years?
Yeah, we started roasting in April. April will be 3 years.
3 years.
This shop has been open since it was 2 years in December.
So is it something that you're still, like, that you always continue to learn and experiment with, and maybe some batches of beans don't turn out as good and that kind of thing? Is it always like an ongoing process?
Absolutely. The saying is, like a lot of disciplines, I'm sure, you can learn 90% of the craft, 95% relatively quickly, a couple months, years.
For the mechanics, the motions of going through it, but then
roasts, right? But then the rest of your
5,
career,
10.
right? Spend the rest of the career chasing that last 5%,
and that makes the difference.
And that's where we are, right? And that's one of the reasons too. It's a good question. We got a smaller roaster, is because we're not afraid to experiment, right? If we try something different and we mess up a batch, it's $70 or $80 worth of coffee
It's not
versus if
thousands
we
of
had
dollars,
it.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So we do make mistakes for sure. I get a phone call or a text in the middle of a roast when I should be paying attention, and maybe we take the Maillard phase a little bit longer than we wanted, and we try the coffee, and sometimes it's a happy accident. That is definitely one way to learn. But yeah, we're nice thing about a small roaster is we're not afraid to experiment.
And speaking, like I said, you talked a little bit about this with the selection of farmers and beans, and I know you put a lot of thought and care into that. How do you approach that research and reach out to those folks, and what goes into that a little bit more of how you're actually selecting the farms and the people that you want to work with?
Sure. Well, first thing is we really trust our importers. We have about 3 importers only that we work with. And we spoke with them at length and we vetted them, and we believe that they truly do best in class of investing back in those regions that they're buying from. To me, a lot of that means long-term contracting, right? Because you can always go to a farm, they have a great crop one year, buy it up, they have a great year, but then where does that leave them after that year? We prefer to work with importers who are committed to long-term contracts with co-ops and with buying groups and washing stations, where they know that if they keep their quality at a certain level, they're going to sell everything that they grow over the next 5-10 years at this price level or this premium to commodity coffee. So that's one of the things that we look for at first. And then we really rely on their coffee knowledge too. So we wanted really knowledgeable importers who know the craft and are happy to share their knowledge with us, because that's one way that we learn as well. So yeah, it's tricky, and the industry as a whole, especially coffee, we'll always have a long way to go, right? Nothing's perfect. So that's part of it too, is continually asking those questions and trying to get closer to the farms and farmers that we buy from, and really learning about the supply chain and kind of how the money flows, and make sure it's getting to the right place.
Absolutely. And so back to your background a little bit, you have an MBA from Carnegie Mellon. You've worked with Kraft Heinz and with other corporations. Very impressive resume, very, very impressive background. And you were progressing, it looks like, up the corporate ladder in your positions. And so how do you go from that to this? What's the mindset? What's going through your mind? You're sort of on one track, and you could commit to that, if you will. Or you could do something like this, which is very different, very entrepreneurial, very grassroots, very local. You're running all aspects of the business. What was going through your mind? What was sort of the thought process in making that transition?
That's a pretty simple one, I guess. You got to follow your passions, right? And some people are fortunate enough to get to a point in their life where you can actually do that. Some people start it from the beginning, right, and grow up and just do what they want to do. I went a different route, right? I wanted to get. I would never give my experience back. I needed the experience that came from the corporate world and from the education to understand how to run a business like this. So the plan was always to do that until I felt like I had the skills, rather than just going in blind, to run a business and understand, what makes a good business and how to properly run one. So did that as long as I felt I needed to and could, until we got to the point where we felt like we could execute this kind of concept properly. And
when you were working with, like, say in your last position, when you're working with food service providers and getting closer, I guess, maybe even than other positions that you had with your company, getting closer to the restaurants or the end users, was that kicking in even more? Was that fueling the passion even more to seeing other people doing and saying, yeah, I could do that. I want to be over there instead. Did that play into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason I ended up at Heinz as in the first place after grad school. I always wanted to be around food in some regard, right? And my skill by trade was marketing, right? But food companies need marketers too, right? So that's how I got into that. And then the food service business that I ran was great, because that's when we're working directly with chefs and restaurant chains and things like that, trying to figure out how to be a better manufacturer to them. So yeah, that was great, and it helped. But yeah, needed to finally pull the trigger and do it for ourselves.
And speaking of those things that you learned, you were talking about having that experience and how it, I'm curious what are some of the tools, the things that you learned in a big corporation that you are able to apply here specifically? Like what's a couple things that come to mind, like things that you were able to bring with you? Because this is different, but there's going to be some things maybe that overlap. Or is there anything that you're able to really bring with you that you're able to put to use right from the very beginning?
Yeah, I think I brought all kind of skills and that I learned and had to use at Heinz, because in a small business, obviously you wear all the hats, right? So I'm our accountant, I'm our commercial finance manager, I'm our revenue manager, our marketer, social media. So all those things for sure. But I think the thing that I came away with the most from all my experience was just how to deal with people, how to find good people, manage people, and understanding the importance of customers and how important it is for everybody on our team and our employees and us as a business to empathize with our customers, to understand what they want, and then craft our business model to fit that. That's been the biggest thing, is just understanding what our customers need, and then being able to hire and train and motivate a staff that's here specifically for that purpose, to deliver on our customers. This business is not about us. It's about the customers, and I think my team gets that, and I certainly get that, and that's the kind of company we're trying to build here. So hopefully our customers feel that too, or at least will over time.
Absolutely. When anybody starts a business, there's always going to be, there's risk involved. There's going to be some fear, apprehension. And so you making that transition, I'm curious, what were some of your big concerns or fears that you had, and how did you address them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think two answers. The first part all starts with planning, right? So I did a lot of planning, and I've written so many business cases through Heinz and things like that, so that experience really helped, right? So we had at least a plan, and I knew the business would never go according to plan, right? You could spend years and years and years projecting and working out a plan, but you also have to be honest with yourself and understand that it's not going to go according to plan. So I think creating a plan, but then being flexible enough to react quickly and being agile as opposed to panic, right? I think is a skill that everybody needs to be ready for, right? You get your plan on paper and then just be ready for it to be not meaningless, but get ready to revamp it time and time and time again, and to be able to flow with the punches. And then the second thing is, once you're up and running, I think you've got to have a great team. I mean, that's it. Like, no matter how passionate I am or how many hours I work, or Vanessa, my wife, who shares the burden with me, you can't do it alone, right? This business is not us, right? It's our team, and it's been like that from the get-go. So finding a team that shares your vision and is willing to put in as much sweat as you are, at least in the early days, to get everything up and running, is absolutely critical, because you're only human. You can only do so much, and just wanting it to happen isn't gonna make it happen, right? You have to have people around you who share the vision and are willing to give themselves as much to the business as you.
And speaking of planning, as the old saying goes, the one thing about every plan is that it won't happen exactly as you put it down. Every plan is going to be wrong, in other words, but it's still important to do. So I'm glad you brought that up. So speaking of that, what are a couple things, one thing, two things, what comes to mind in terms of if you go back a few years to your original planning before you started, what were some of the things that didn't happen according to plan, and it could be good, it could be better or worse, either way, but what things turned out a bit different or surprised you from the original planning that you had to adapt and change as you actually got into having a going concern and actually operating?
I think one of the big things was just how long it took us to get the full business model built out. And by that, I mean all the different things that we sell and do here, and the events that we host. We all wanted it to look like the business does today on day one,
right?
Which wasn't realistic, right?
Yeah. You kind of add the pieces as you're going along.
Exactly. Like, for instance, we bake a lot more stuff in-house now than we did when we opened. So we had to phase from bringing in a lot more stuff to baking our own, right? Where we would have rather had made all of our own stuff on day one. We would have rather had live music and our license for selling beer and wine we didn't have until 4 or 5 months after we opened, just because those things take a while to go through. So things like that, we were running the business knowing that there's all these other things we want to add on and do, and we still are. But just kind of preparing for that fact, and admit to yourselves that your business doesn't need to look on day one like you want it to look on day one of year 2 or year 3, right? It's an evolving thing, and that's fine, and that's kind of the fun part of it. But yeah, going into it, it's always a little disappointing when you feel behind, or you're not, you want day one to your business to look like you've always dreamt it to be, and it takes time, and that's okay.
It's also, there's another lesson in there, which is it's important to, some people hold back from launching because it doesn't look full, complete, and ready to go as it does in the plan, in their mind, in the vision in their mind, or on paper. And because it's not complete, they sometimes hold back. And what I like about what you're saying is, hey, look, we had this complete vision. We had all these parts that we wanted to add. but we just launched sort of maybe bare bones anyway, and then worked to improve it over time, as opposed to, and yes, I can understand there might be a little disappointment in that, but also being realistic and saying, you know what, that's why you operate and improve, because that's part of the process, and it's not going to come out being perfect, right out of the womb. You know what I mean? Like it's not going to be like that. And of course, anybody listening that's an operator probably knows that, what we're talking about. But if you've never created a business yet and you're thinking about it, this is an important lesson, because people can be disappointed or overly concerned that because it's not full bodied and full ready to go, that maybe they should hold back. I mean, what are your thoughts on, hey, just go ahead and launch with, the minimally viable product or whatever it is that obviously you have to have a service or a product ready to offer, but don't hold back and wait for it to be perfect.
Yeah, I think you hit the key. You said with the minimally viable. The viable is the key part, right? It's a fine line. It's a very fine line, because if you pull the trigger too soon and then people come in, you only get a chance to make a first impression once, right? It's true. And people are pretty quick to judge, right? And there's a lot of great options out there. So if you put something forth that you're not proud of, that's gonna backfire. But you're absolutely right. If you wait for it to be perfect, you'll never open the door. So it's finding that balance and finding that line. And once you're proud of your product and you think that the core and the essence is ready to go, at that point you got to go for it.
You were speaking of your product offerings and how you've added on, and now you have a pretty robust menu, I would say, not just with the drinks but with the food. I'm curious, what goes into the food selection? How do you decide what makes it onto the menu? Some things you produce, some things you don't. You get from outside bakeries, etc. But what is the process for how you think through the menu's precious, right? You want to cultivate that menu. You don't want it too big. You don't want it too small. How do you decide, and who's part of that on your team? Is it, obviously you may be one of the people that has the final say, or you may have the final say, but is there a culinary lead, for example, in your business? Is it a sort of a team feedback approach? What is your approach for making those critical decisions? Because I have to say, you do have a really great menu, and you could tell a lot of thought and care went into it.
I think it all kind of starts with our philosophy, or our core, our DNA, whichever is just simple food, but really high-end ingredients, right? I mean, we're a cafe. We're not trying to win James Beard Awards or anything like that, right? We're trying to just make good solid toast or good solid oatmeal, and those are the things that you cook at home, right? So that's what we're trying to do, and everything has to pass that filter, right? It has to be real high-end ingredients, maybe put together in a way that you just wouldn't think to do on a busy Tuesday morning at home, but you could if you wanted and you took the time, right? It's nothing that we do here is difficult. It's just a matter of finding the right ingredients and finding those kind of things that you would make at home if you had the time. That's kind of been our philosophy. And my wife, Vanessa, has been instrumental in getting the menu up and running. And until about 6 months ago, she was that was all her, right? And it was the things that we made at home. She doesn't have a culinary background. She's a graphic designer by trade, which actually helped with the business a lot too. But but she, we put on the menu things that we made at home and things that we loved to make when we would go on vacation and we'd have the time to take a little bit of extra time, or if we were got to go to a nice market and do some shopping for some ingredients that you don't always see at the grocery store, that kind of stuff. And then 6 months ago, Hannah joined us, who's now our kitchen manager and kitchen lead, and she's incredible. And she actually has culinary training and background, and it's great to have her, around to take us.
So if
to
you
the
were
next
going to
level.
add something today, or consider adding something today, what would be the approach? Would you start it as a special? Would you test it with the market in some way, or would you first make sure it just passed the test internally? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, we would make sure it passed the test internally and had a purpose for being on the menu. If the purpose could be as simple as adding some variety, right? But we don't want to make it too big and complicated, and our customers don't need that either. So it just needs to pass the test of it's on the menu for a specific reason. It's for this group of customers for this time of day, and then we taste everything internally. We all get to weigh in on decisions here. We're a very flat organization in that regard. We just go for it. That's a nice thing about a small business like this. If we want to try something, we just try it. We might not even put it on the menu. We might just put it in the case and see if
nimble
it sells.
is a beautiful part of being a small business.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, what brings you the most joy in your business? What do you look forward to doing?
Two things. I think the biggest is when I get to walk in the morning and like the cafe is full of people like chatting and laughing, and it's loud and it's lively, and you can see that like we're an important place for people to come, whether it's just a business meeting or people are part of their routine on their way to work. It's a nice place to come, and I think There are certain days when there's a certain buzz in here, and you realize that you've delivered on that mission, and that feels great. It's just awesome to see people being happy and talking to one another. And the second thing is all about my team, getting to see them develop and get new opportunities. For instance, Sydney, our barista and bar manager, came here, and she does a great job with those jobs, but she also does our photography now, which is kind of like a side project and passion for her. And she's come so far. And if you follow our Instagram, we have decent, pretty awesome photography at times when it's not me doing it. It's Sydney, because she's awesome. So to see people get to hone and develop skills like that, and that's super awesome. As a manager and as an owner, we're here for our customers, but I'm also here for our team and to give people opportunity to do new and cool things.
I can tell from a lot of your answers already so far, some of the things we talked about, you really have a people-centered approach, because you mentioned communication earlier when you're talking about your corporate background. Your two answers now involve people, both customers and your employees. I think that's so critical for a small business, for an entrepreneur. I mean, really of any business of any size, but especially one like this that brings people together. And I'm so glad to hear you talk. I just want to commend you on that, because I think it stands out in everything you do. And I think customers feel that, even if they don't know the owner, or they don't know the proprietor, they don't always know the story. But you're in the cafe a lot, so a lot of people I'm sure do know you. But I think you get a certain vibe about a place that has that involvement. And you can also go to places that you've never been to before, or that you've frequented and you remember them being one way, and then you could tell when that vibe has disappeared.
Right.
And I think you're doing a good job of keeping it alive here, so I just wanted to commend you on that.
Thank you.
What's next for you, and what's next for De Fer in the future? Is operating this give you ideas for a spin-off, a French bistro? Is there another location in the works, or is that something that you're thinking about or talking about with your wife and your team? Or is it just, growing your wholesale coffee and your direct consumer and you're, just having an awesome location? I'm just curious what your future plans are.
All kind of ideas, always having ideas, right? That's the fun thing. But for now, we're trying to focus on making this place still as great as it can be. 2 years feels like a lifetime, but I know in reality it's not that long, right? So we still have got a long way to go with everything we want to do here at this location specifically. We want to focus on that. Also, we do want to open a couple of locations in the not too distant future. I think for any coffee roaster or business owner, restaurant owners, you kind of have to get to a certain level of scale before the kind of efficiency kicks in that you need to make a sustainable business model financially, right?
Sure.
So we have another place opening, a smaller cafe in the summer at a new building over at the Pittsburgh Technology Center along 2nd Avenue there. That's been announced maybe a month or two ago.
Congratulations
in a new office building there. So that will be really cool, yeah. So that's a first smaller step. This is obviously always going to be our flagship, but it would be nice to get a couple of smaller locations that are more coffee-centric out there, so that we can offer more management experience opportunities to our team and things like that. So that's the near term, is always going to be just making this place as great as it can be, get a couple other places open, and then maybe we'll be freed up to dream a little bigger about what's next.
Sounds good. To wrap up, what advice would you like to give to somebody out there who's an entrepreneur who wants to start a business, or maybe they already started but they're very early into the process? If you think about back to yourself a few years ago when you were still in the corporate world and you were planning, what would you have liked to have known, or what lessons have you learned that you would like to share?
I guess tactically, I would have liked to have heard how much unexpected stuff you need to plan for, right? Everybody says that, but nobody can elaborate, right? You're like, what does that mean? Put more money in the bank? You're not ever sure what that means, but everything that can go wrong will. You'll find yourself, things breaking that you never thought would break, and you're fixing. So I would just say, prepare as well as you possibly can, and leave a big of a cushion as you can to deal with stuff that, whether that's financially or HR wise or resources. Build yourself as big of a cushion as you can to deal with all those unexpected things that come. And also, make sure your heart's in it, right? If your heart isn't in 110%, don't go for it. And that's pretty obvious, but also your team has to have that. I'd say that's the other key piece of advice that I would give, is don't expect to just hire people and have them do the type of job that you want them to do just because you're giving them a paycheck. Doesn't matter how big the paycheck is, you're going to get people, if you pay a ton of money, you'll get people who care about making a ton of money. You have to get people whose heart is in it as well. And I think that's the only thing that can truly make a difference in the long run.
Matt, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having us at this awesome location
Yeah,
here.
no, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Thanks. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do me and the Pittsburgh small business community a huge favor by giving it a rating on your favorite podcast app. It really helps others to find the show so that we can continue to build our community. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And if you know someone who should be on the podcast or you'd like to connect with me, you can reach me at proprietorsofpittsburgh.com or at 412-336-8247. I'm Darin Vilano, and this is the Proprietors of Pittsburgh podcast. Take care.